Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. This week, House Republicans are commemorating National Police Week to honor our men and women in blue, as well as their families who sacrifice so much for our communities across America. Every single day, our brave law enforcement heroes put their lives on the line to ensure law and order across the country. But under Joe Biden and far-left failed leadership, the safety of America's law enforcement has been sacrificed for the sake of the Democrats' pro-criminal agenda. Lawless liberals handicap our police from doing their jobs with failed bail reform, like my home state in New York, and pro-criminal policies that appease the far-left Democrats' defund the police agenda. Now more than ever, Republicans recognize the need to fight for our police and against the far-left extremist anti-police movement. Republicans have and always will proudly back the blue. This week, we will bring to the House floor a series of bills to ensure that law enforcement has the tools and resources needed to preserve law and order. Today, we are honored to be joined by several of our colleagues who previously served in law enforcement and have great legislation on the floor this week. Their voices are so incredibly important to our House Republican Conference. We are also joined by two special guests, Sheriff Chad Bianco of Riverside County in California, representing the major county sheriffs of America, and we're also joined by the President of the National Fraternal Order of Police, Patrick Yos. Thank you so much to our special guests for joining us. I want to first hand it over to Sheriff Bianco from California. Sheriff, come on.
Good morning. I am Chad Bianco. I am the elected sheriff of Riverside County in Southern California. Today at the National Law Enforcement Memorial, we recognize law enforcement officers who have made the ultimate sacrifice in the service of others. On behalf of all law enforcement leaders, I applaud Republican lawmakers at the federal and state level for their efforts in making public safety a priority. Over the past decade or so, the rule of law, a requirement of a civilized society, has been severely eroded by a sick and twisted progressive social experiment fraudulently called criminal justice reform. In this alternate universe, law enforcement officers are the bad guys and criminals are somehow victims of society. We cannot have a country without respect for law enforcement and an adherence to the law and order of our country. There must be consequences for criminal behavior. It is time to make crime a crime again. Today, my prayers go out to the families of those who have paid the ultimate price in the service above self. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheriff. It is now my honor to introduce the President of the National Fraternal Order of Police, Patrick Yos.
Good morning. Today, we come together to honor the lives of 222 law enforcement officers who gave their life in the service of others, that last full measure. 43 years ago, the Fraternal Order of Police had a small group of people to get together, about 100 or so, met at Senate Park and had the very first National Peace Officers Memorial Day. Today, we're going to have tens of thousands recognizing the sacrifice of our fallen and their families in the struggles that we all endure. You know, when we go about our daily lives, we're going to get up in the morning, we're going to feed our kids, send them off to work. We're going to do the things that we do as Americans. The next day, we're going to do it all again. And we often take this cycle of life for granted. But let me tell you the reality of it. It's bought and paid for by a whole lot of men and women who suit up and show up every day in communities across this country and make a difference in the lives of those they serve. Some 24,067 engraved on a granite wall, on a marble wall, not very far from here. Now, when you look at that wall and you say, that's a lot of numbers, I think it really brings home to you the sacrifice of so many people, the name, just one name after another, the sacrifice of so many people who protect our way of life. But really what it is, every name has a face. It has a story. It has a memory. It has a family that has been left behind. And that's why we're here today. As a free society, it is our responsibility to make sure that we always honor the sacrifice of our fallen and support the families as they move on. So I am honored to have all of you here today to be part of our memorial service where we pay tribute to those men and women who are brave enough to suit up and show up every single day and go in communities across this country and make a difference in the lives of the people they serve. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from our members who are former law enforcement, who, as I said, are important voices in our House Republican Conference, starting with Sheriff Clay Higgins from Louisiana.
It was captain, but I'll take the promotion. Ladies and gentlemen, we honor the Thin Blue Line this week in Washington, D.C., and it's appropriate that we do so. But I'd like to remind America that the lives of police officers and deputies, rank and file, frontline men and women that wear the badge across the country, they're American men and women just like you, wherever you are in your living room, watching this on your phone. In the years that I served wearing a badge, which were many, over 8 of those years were night shift. And before I'd leave our humble little home, my wife, Becca, who had returned home from her day at work, she'd see me off and hand me my little lunch. And we had a little ritual. She would say, "Be safe and come home to me." And I would say, "Don't worry about me, worry about the other guy." And off I would go. And yes, it was a ritual, and yes, it was reflective of the love and joy that filled our home, but it was very real as well, because we didn't know if I was coming home. And sometimes officers leave for the night and they don't come home. And as Americans, we can sometimes take that for granted. And this is a week where Washington, D.C. comes together, Democrats and Republicans, all of us, and we recognize the service and sacrifice of the men and women of the Thin Blue Line. So it's with great honor that I introduce some of my colleagues that have worn a badge and continue to serve. I have, is Pete here? Yes. Pete, come on up, brother. Pete Stauber, Minnesota, is in the house. Yes, sir.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pete Stauber, and I'm proud to have served over 20 years as a police officer. Policing is an honorable and noble profession, which is why I'm so disturbed by the dramatic rise in violent attacks on America's law enforcement. 2023 was the worst year on record, as 378 police officers were shot in the line of duty. Make no mistake, this uptick in violence is the direct result of the radical Democrats' soft-on-crime policies and the defund the police movement. With attacks on our law enforcement at an all-time high, it is no wonder that so many cities across this nation are now experiencing a crime crisis. More and more officers are retiring early, and police departments are having a difficult time recruiting. Recruitment, retention, and morale are at an all-time low. Fortunately, there are still amazing officers who continue to preserve the Thin Blue Line between citizens and criminals. I am proud to know and to have worked with many of them. These men and women show up for us every day, and now it is our turn to show up for them. That's why I'm proud that this National Police Week, the House will consider my resolution to condemn the anti-police sentiment that has resulted in increased violence against our law enforcement community, and to acknowledge the impact this institution has on the safety of officers who are on the job. I believe the best way we can honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice is by showing our unwavering support for the heroes who are still doing this dangerous and much-needed job. I now want to introduce Representative Anthony D'Esposito from the state of New York.
Well, thank you, Pete. And first and foremost, I think I speak for not only the members of law enforcement that join us here today, but thousands upon thousands of men and women who wear the uniform each and every day. I want to say a sincere thank you to our leadership because they have the courage to put onto the floor this week bills that will dramatically affect and improve the lives of law enforcement officers. And they walk the walk and talk the talk. When very often our colleagues on the other side of the aisle seem very sad and upset and send out a nice tweet when one of our loved ones are killed or injured in the line of duty. I look forward to seeing how they vote on so much of this legislation this week. On Monday night, we joined with thousands on the lawn for the vigil, hearing the names of men and women who, like Clay mentioned, kissed their loved one before they headed off to shift and never came home. And sadly enough, my department, the NYPD, often leads that list each and every year. Whether it's those still dying from the devastation on September 11th, or those killed in the line of duty, like most recently, and a name that we'll add next year, Jonathan Diller, who kissed his wife Stephanie before he headed out to work to do what he did best: reduce crime, arrest bad guys, and take illegal firearms off the street. But that afternoon in Queens, on what many thought would have been a routine traffic stop, he was met with a barrage of bullets. Barrage of bullets from an illegal firearm fired by an individual who was arrested 21 times. New York State had the opportunity 21 times to keep this cold-blooded killer rotting in a jail cell where he belonged. But yet, because of Democratic policies, rogue district attorneys, and the anti-police rhetoric that plague many places like New York, Jonathan Diller's killer was freed after 21 times and allowed to murder a New York City police officer. The legislation that we're going to see on the floor this week seems pretty common sense. And one of the inscriptions on a monument at the National Law Enforcement Memorial, right under the bust of a lion, simply says, "It's not how they died that made them heroes, it's how they lived." And this week, House Republicans are putting legislation on the floor that's going to improve the way that these law enforcement officers live. So to our leadership, thank you very much. And I'd now like to introduce my friend from Mississippi, Mike Ezel.
Thank you, and thank you to all our leadership for all your support for law enforcement. I couldn't be more proud to be serving here with you in this House. I'd like to say, as a second-generation law enforcement officer, a three-term sheriff, a chief of police, a chief of detectives, but the greatest job that I ever had was being a patrolman. Being a patrolman out there at night, being responsible for the safety of my town and for my county. My dad taught me early on about protecting the citizens that we served. I was always glad to be the guy that showed up at 2 o'clock in the morning when it was storming and pouring down rain and some little old lady was scared because somebody had been knocking on her door or been disturbing her peace. I was always glad to be that guy that showed up when nobody else was available. And if you think about what's going on in this country right now with the defund the police movement, the way that the police are being demonized, who are you going to call at 2 o'clock in the morning when you need help? When your son or daughter is out there broke down, maybe away at college and need help, who are you going to call? You think that the left's going to show up? Absolutely not. They're not going to do it. They're going to send out their nice little tweets when somebody gets killed or something happens, but you'll see where the proof's in the pudding. Actions speak a lot louder than words. Being a police officer in my life was one of the greatest opportunities that I ever had to be able to serve the citizens that I worked for. I love that job. I love being a police officer. But what's going on in this country right now cannot stand another day, and we've got to stand up to them every day. It's a fight that we're willing to take, and I ask you to stand with us. God bless you. God bless America, and protect our men and women of law enforcement. Thank you very much. I need to introduce Whip Tom Emmer. Sorry about that, Tom.
No, it's quite all right. Thank you, Mike, and to my other colleagues. It's been 3.5 years of Joe Biden and the Democrats' pro-crime, anti-law enforcement agenda. And in those 3.5 years, we've had the highest number of law enforcement officers intentionally killed in the line of duty in 2 decades, double-digit increases in crime throughout major cities across this country, a nationwide police hiring shortage that my colleague from Minnesota mentioned, and the demonization of law enforcement officers for simply doing their jobs, including the political prosecution of a state trooper in my home state of Minnesota. All because the Democrat Party would rather cave to the leftist lunacy that has made them the most anti-law enforcement party in our history. They'd rather do that than support the brave men and women in blue. This National Police Week, House Republicans will counteract the Democrats' pro-crime, anti-police agenda by bringing 7 bills to the floor that support our nation's law enforcement and give them the resources they need to keep our communities safe. But it's clear the Democrats don't just have a law and order problem. They also have an Israel problem. So much so that they'd rather stand in solidarity with terrorists than support our strongest ally in the Middle East. This week, we will also force House Democrats to go on the record about Joe Biden's decision to circumvent Congress and unilaterally halt military aid to our ally Israel for his own political gain. A move that was once considered an impeachable offense by House Democrats in 2019. And to be clear, initiating the process for a separate arms sale does not make up for withholding previously approved sales. Make no mistake. Whether it's standing with our brave law enforcement officers or standing with one of our most precious allies, House Republicans will continue to govern where Joe Biden and the Democrats continue to fail. And with that, I turn it over to our leader, Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Whip. And as we kick off National Police Week, let me first thank all of our men and women in law enforcement across the country who risk their lives to keep our communities safe. We all owe a deep debt of gratitude to the sacrifice they make. And of course, this week we're pausing, especially for those who made the ultimate sacrifice, those who have fallen in the line of duty, as we had a tribute last night, and we will continue to pay tribute to their families who will always pay that price. I want to take you back to June 14th of 2017. I've always had such reverence for our men and women in law enforcement, worked with them when Pat Yost and I worked together in the state legislature to make sure the laws were right for our police officers in Louisiana. But on that day, on a baseball field, of all places, I got to see the bravery and heroism at a different level of our men and women in uniform. And crazed gunman comes out to kill all of us on the ball field that day. And the only reason I'm here today, before you alive, is because of David Bailey and Crystal Griner with the United States Capitol Police, who risked their life for all of us. There were over a dozen members of Congress who would have been taken out that day. And when you walk around the Capitol, we see them all around. There have been days where they've been challenged. There have been officers who have fallen in the line of duty here. That day, thank God, none of them fell. But both the United States Capitol Police and the Virginia Police who came to our rescue that day put their lives at risk, just like law enforcement officers do every day. It's a special calling. to be willing to risk your life to save somebody else's, to protect somebody else who is being threatened by someone who just wakes up one day and decides they want to go and wreak havoc on society. They want to go and try to take someone else's life. They want to, in some cases, try to take a law enforcement officer's life. And by the way, both David and Crystal that day were shot while the shooter was trying to kill us. But they were not, the shooter wasn't successful because they were there. They answered that call, and they do it every day. And again, there's colleagues of mine that are going to be voting on the floor later today for some of these bills who were on the ball field that day who wouldn't be here as well if they didn't do their job. And so we don't hear about it all the time. You know, you hear about an incident if maybe a law enforcement officer is killed in the line of duty. As tragic as that is, every day a law enforcement officer puts their life at risk, and it's not as well reported because the day ended well for everybody but the bad guy, as Clay said. You know, don't worry about me, worry about the other guy. And so while they're risking their lives, it's important that they know that the community has their back. We surely have their backs. I'm especially proud to serve with colleagues of mine who actually served in law enforcement before they answered this calling to come and serve in Congress. And so as they make that sacrifice, just know in communities across America, when someone here illegally, for example, assaults a police officer and is let go the next day by a DA who just thinks it's all right for somebody to beat up a cop, we're passing a bill that says it's not okay. And in fact, you will be deported if you assault a cop here in America. We stand up for our men and women in law enforcement. I hope the vote is huge on that. Not just all Republicans. Every Democrat should vote for these bills too. To not just in deed, but in vote, support our men and women in uniform because they have our back at the most troubling of times. Let's have their back, and we will this week. With that, the man who's always had our back, our Speaker, Mike Johnson.
Thank you all so much for being here. It is an important day. I do want to thank Sheriff Bianco. Your words are very inspiring, Sheriff, and National Fraternal Order of Police President Yos for his words. And of course, our dear friends, as Steve pointed out, our colleagues here who have worn the badge. Clay Higgins and Pete Stauber and Anthony D'Esposito and Mike Ezel and others in our conference who have served in many capacities, and we're delighted that they're here now. You see behind us standing here others who have worn the badge, who have stood on that thin blue line and put their lives on the line for everybody else. And so we do this every day. We look for new ways, the House Republicans, to stand with law enforcement. We stand with the men and women in blue. We stand with all of our sheriffs and police officers, our border patrol agents, our law enforcement officers across the board in every capacity because they are doing the hard thing. They are doing the often difficult thing. Increasingly, it is a difficult calling and vocation. Today is Peace Officers Memorial Day, of course, and so as was mentioned earlier, we pay tribute to all those who out of that selfless sacrifice have paid the ultimate price. They have given their lives for our safety, and they have laid down their lives for others, and that is the greatest blessing of all. 26,000 officers have died in the line of duty, 56 in America just this year alone. And these officers exemplify the American spirit. They are the best of us, the best in every city and community. They have pledged their own lives and their sacred honors so that others may live in peace. And we honor that. And that's a biblical admonition to give honor where honor is due, especially on a week and on a day like this. And this week we pay tribute to those who do clothe themselves with that dignity and decency and who stand on the lines of justice and keep us safe. So as Leader Scalise mentioned, we'll be passing legislation on the floor to make that clear and to do everything we possibly can to celebrate those officers and to protect those who protect all of us. And oftentimes it's a thankless job, as you know. As has been mentioned today, there are many people, too many people, and often some elected officials in Washington who have given voice to this idea that we should defund the police or have anti-police legislation or policy. It's absolute madness. And we are now seeing the completely foreseeable result of that in communities around the country with crime off the charts, violent crime rising, and all of these problems with the open border, all of it related together. And what the common denominator in all of it is a disrespect for law and order, as was mentioned earlier, for the rule of law, and that is something that we have to maintain. An FBI report just yesterday has reported that the rate of assaults on law enforcement officers in America is at a 10-year high. We have got to reverse that. As the sheriff said earlier, we've got to make crimes criminal again. I mean, it's just common sense. And I think everybody in the country who looks at this objectively understands it. Anybody who's not involved in the radical, woke, progressive left understands clearly that you got to maintain the peace. This week on the House floor, we'll be voting, for example, other legislation to expand the concealed carry rights of qualified police officers. How many of you understand that when the good guys are armed, the bad guys do less harm, right? We're going to address anti-police attacks, protect law enforcement in the line of duty, support the mental health of those who serve as police officers, and we'll be voting to deport illegal aliens who assault law enforcement. Boy, we sure hope everybody votes for that one. This ought to be easy. This ought to be non-controversial, and we're going to make sure that everybody sees where all of us in the House stand. Our law enforcement officers keep us safe. They put their lives on the line to do it, and we are forever indebted. And these gestures and these pieces of legislation that we passed this week is the very least that we can do to support them. With that, we'll take a few questions. Front row.
So, I mean, the DOJ has been stonewalling y'all in some of y'all's investigations. Y'all have the her Garland markup, contempt markup thing for the her and refusing to do that. The DOJ is also stonewalling the House Ethics Committee and not giving over any records regarding Matt Gaetz and their investigation. Do you think that the DOJ should be giving over those records that House Ethics is requesting?
I haven't paid any attention to that at all. I can tell you that the Department of Justice has clearly been politicized. Some of us consider this actually to be a weaponized DOJ, and Merrick Garland is in charge. He is the Attorney General at the top, and I think that they have used our system of justice against political opponents, of course, the most prominent of which is Donald J. Trump. I was with him yesterday in Manhattan, and many in the press have asked, why did you go there? Because I'm a former litigator. I'm an attorney. This is an egregious violation, a travesty of justice. They are using the judicial system for political purposes, and this is something the framers warned us against. In a constitutional republic, look, everybody, remember, I remind us all the time here, we're still an experiment on the world stage. There has never been a system of government like ours. We started something new in 1776, a constitutional republic. We removed the monarch, and we said it's going to be a government of, by, and for the people. You know what's critical to maintain, to keep a republic, is that you have to have the people, we're self-governing, the people have to believe that we have equal justice under law. There's a reason that Lady Justice is depicted with a blindfold. There cannot be two tiers of justice. There can't be two systems. You can't exact political revenge on one political figure using the justice system and then give a pass to the other. That's what the American people see. And it doesn't matter how they try to spin it or make it into something that it is not. We see what is happening. The soon-to-be official nominee of the Republican Party is tied up in court in Manhattan and cannot be on the campaign trail throughout the week. This is the 5th week that he's been tied up on what is not even easily defined as a crime that he had nothing to do with. The DOJ officials, prosecutors looked at all these charges 8 years ago. They did not bring charges because there was nothing there. Now they've done it suddenly. Why? Because Donald Trump is running for president again. And this is repeated across the system. Jack Smith, the special counsel. You know, just last week it was revealed that they had tampered with evidence. They had moved around the evidence in the boxes, and that trial now is apparently being postponed indefinitely. Why? Because they have real problems on the prosecution side now. Look, it's a simple question, and it's a simple answer. We have great concern about this Department of Justice and these state prosecutors, local prosecutors around the country who are using our judicial system and our court system for political revenge. We got to bring an end to this. We have to, because the people have to believe in our system, and we're eroding their faith in our system through all this, and that's what's so concerning about it. Back row.
Speaker Johnson, we've heard a lot this week about Democrats supporting defund the police. The Republican Study Committee budget cuts the main federal grant program that local departments use to hire officers. How is that not proposing to defund the police?
I haven't looked into the details of the RSC budget. There's lots of nuances. They also plus up other areas where you support law enforcement, because that's a central theme of what we believe. It's part of our worldview, it's part of our party platform, and it will always be consistent. You know, a lot of the Democrats in the House now are trying to revise history and pretend as though and even say that they never supported defund police. But I served on House Judiciary, and I have some pretty famous vignettes, viral videos, where I went through and literally took all the time reading all of their quotes. I mean, it's top Democrats in the House who, just a few years back, were all on board with defunding the police. And we told them at that time, and we remind them again today, that that's a fool's errand. You cannot defund the people who keep your communities safe, obviously. But they did it anyway. They said it anyway. And in some of these communities, they actually went forward with that policy. And that's the places around the country where you have the greatest levels of crime. And the people are crying out for change, and I think you'll see a lot of that reflected in the election cycle in November. Yes, sir. Far ahead,
yes,
please.
the House Education and Workforce Committee is going to be looking at HHS and its policies and priorities. Can you elaborate a little bit on the job that Becerra has done there?
Yes. I mean, look, we feel like there's a lot of agencies of the federal government who are doing things that are beyond the scope of what they're supposed to do, and that they're abusing that authority. We set up a select committee on the weaponization of the federal government at the beginning of this Congress when the Republicans took over, and people balked and said, how could you use such a hyperbolic term, weaponization? Well, I was on that committee, and we began to look, overturning stone after stone after stone of all these three-letter agencies that have been actually turned against the very people that they're supposed to serve. So the House Education and Workforce Committee is a very important one, has broad jurisdiction over a lot of these areas, and they're overturning some of those stones as well. Our Oversight Committee is as well, Energy and Commerce, many of these committees, and they're trying to determine where these agencies went awry. There's probably a lot of examples there that they'll uncover, and so we'll see what that develops. It's a methodical, very careful, deliberate investigation, and I think that's what our constitutional responsibility is, to carry that out in that way.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You had mentioned yesterday that you were going to be working with the Oversight and Judiciary Committees about avenues to, your words, rein in Special Counsel Jack Smith. I wanted to know if you have any details on what that might look like, what you're looking at.
Well, look, there's a lot of different ideas. People are alarmed that the special counsel in that capacity has been abused in recent years, and we can cite multiple examples of that. How does Congress rein that in? How does Congress correct that error and ensure that a special counsel is not abusing their authority? We have oversight, of course, but we also have the power of the purse. And so there's a lot of different ideas being discussed right now on what that would look like. Do you defund the entire special counsel office? What most people don't realize is that is not funded in the regular appropriations process. It's a separate, distinct account, and it's effectively on auto fund and autopilot, and so it's not part of the regular, appropriations process. So it has to be dealt with separately. It has to be dealt with very carefully and methodically. There's a role for an individual like that when there are conflicts of interest within DOJ itself, but it has to maintain and follow the rule of law. We can't have special counsels engaged in political vendettas either, and that's what a lot of people see right now. So we haven't yet come to a consensus on what that remedy looks like, but we're actively discussing it even today among members, and how about stay tuned on that? We'll get you more information. Thank you so much, and thanks for the law enforcement officers for being here.
It was really good. I enjoyed it.